Vicki, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. So glad you could join us today. Just before we address our objectives, we're going to be covering 4 core sets of communication skills: active listening, constructive feedback, resolving conflicts, and coaching. And these have their origin in a workshop that we conducted, my goodness, now it was 23 years ago, for a group of junior consultants, coincidentally, who were looking to improve their communication effectiveness with all of their clients. So since this topic, this set of topics is 23 years practiced, I will do my level best today to share as many current and recent examples of, as someone once called them, the good, the bad, and the ugly of, of these 4 core communication skills. So, of course, we're going to cover active listening, constructive feedback, conflict resolution, and coaching. So let's see if I can, there we go. So one thing we learned when we started to conduct the seminars, which form the basis of today's webinar, is that it was important to understand first what connects people and what is important to people. So we started asking the organizations where we were facilitating this workshop on these communication skills, what are your values and who do you value? And so we've done this in, I don't know, let's just say a couple of hundred organizations over the past 23 years. And here on this slide is a summary of what they have said is especially important to them. So we said, who do you value and what do you value? Well, they said, we value our customers. We also value our people, our teamwork, our drive to continuously improve, to be constantly and consistently looking to get better and better at what we do. They also said we value our integrity. We value providing the best in quality service to our customers, both internal and external, and we value our performance. So then we asked, okay, so what is the thread which links us? What kind of ties all of this together? Who we value, what we value, and maybe even what we value about who we value. And they said it's communication. So communication, communicating effectively and a drive to continuously get better and better at communicating helps us lead people. Communicating effectively helps us guide people, certainly helps us manage people, and helps us coach people successfully. So now that led us to think about this. You know, what types of communication do we engage in? Well, of course, there's the spoken word. So there's verbal communication. There's also nonverbal communication. You know, it can be gestures, it can be eye contact, it can be nodding, it can be folding our arms, which sometimes can mean we're cold, and other times it might mean we're not receptive to what someone else is saying. There are all types of verbal and nonverbal communication. And then, of course, there's written communication. And this has really come to be more significant when we think about email. And when we think about when we're communicating by email, are we also communicating with these people by phone, in a meeting? You know, are we communicating with them in other ways, or are we only communicating with people via email? And then we asked, what is the point of any communication? Well, there are really 2 points. First of all, any and all communication must always have a link to action. You know, what action, if I'm the recipient of an email, or a phone call, or I'm in a meeting and I'm being asked to take action, to move on something. What action am I supposed to take? And then if I'm the communicator, what action am I asking others to take? And often by when, so what's the timing of the action? And then also, the other point of any communication is that there must always be a link to organizational results. For example, we've all worked on projects, and our project always has at least one goal. Well, what is just as important is that our project goal or goals be connected to at least one of our organizational goals. So, for example, if we're part of a sales project team meeting, and we're part of a sales project team, so maybe one of our goals is to improve our sales with our business customers, our business clients. Well, that goal of selling more and selling more effectively to our business clients is always going to be connected to our organizational sales goal. Maybe in our organization, 75% of our sales is to businesses and 25% of our sales is to consumers. And so if that's the breakdown, as is often the breakdown in organizations, then, what is an increase, let's say, of 5% to our commercial customers? How is that going to contribute to the bottom line and help us achieve the organizational goal of, increasing? Maybe our organizational goal is to increase our sales by 5% to our business customers. So see, there should always be a link in our communication to at least one of our organizational goals. Okay, so again, we're focusing on 4 core communication skills, but let me start here by saying that there are and should be some connections between these 4 sets of communication skills. So let's address these first in the context of managing effectively, because many, if not all of us on this webinar are managers. So for any of us to manage effectively, let's focus for a moment on listening. So some of the best advice I ever got was from one of my managers at Prudential, John Breedlove, who once said to me, "Chris, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You should try to listen twice as often as you are speaking." Excellent advice. Another context for listening is when we are, as managers, testing for understanding. We've given someone some instructions about how to perform a certain task, and so we test for understanding. So we ask the person, let's use as an example, we've given someone a new project to work on, and part of that project is to set up a second office for our business. And so we've given them a set of instructions that they're going to follow, and so before they go to try to open that second office, we say, okay, could you just, repeat back to me the initial set of instructions that I've given you? I just want to make sure that you understand fully, and also to answer any questions that you might have. So this is an excellent test in this example of our listening skills. So another excellent piece of advice I was given a long time ago is to take notes whenever you can, because taking notes is actually one of the most important listening techniques that we can use. And also, in the process of taking notes, to capture the 1, 2, or 3 key points, as someone once said, the bullet points that someone is making. So what are the key, when we're listening, what are the key 1, 2, or 3 points that the person speaking is making? and we want to capture that in our written notes. And then there are other situations where we don't, really have access to a notepad. And so we want to do our best when we're listening to capture the 1, 2, or 3 key points that this person is making so we can give it back to them. We can repeat back what we've heard. And a favorite technique I was once taught when it comes to listening is, what I've heard you say is ABC, 1, 2, 3. Did I hear you correctly? So for this person opening the second office, to use that example, maybe some of the key instructions I've given them is to, contact someone with a locksmith company. So we can go with them to this location. We can identify the number of doors that are going to need locks and then, of course, keys, and to verify with them that the locksmith understands how many locks are to be installed and in which door jambs, and then therefore how many keys we want. Or maybe we're using key cards with key pads. And so where do key pads need to be set up, and what is the process for getting cards coded so people can enter at those locations? Okay, that's just one example. And we'll address constructive feedback and resolving conflicts and coaching and counseling and mentoring even in a little bit. But now we're going to come back to our broader conversation to keep listening in its proper context. So when we're communicating, some questions we want to ask are, with whom are we communicating? Who else is a stakeholder in our communication? Let me give an example there. We were working recently with a project team, and this project team were a group of people, some administrators, some managers, who were in charge. This was in a hospital, and they were tasked with managing the project of building a new wing onto the hospital. So this hospital at the time had approximately 200 beds, and the new wing was going to provide another 100. So basically increasing the bed capacity of the hospital by 50%. And in the process, the chief administrative officer let us all know that he knew 2 people who were willing to make a substantial donation in order to make this hospital wing a reality. And each of these donors was ready to donate $1 million to contribute to the project. And so we had a discussion about these 2 people as a project team, and we agreed that the chief administrative officer, who already had a relationship with these 2 individuals, should reach out to them and ask each of them how they would like to be included on our project. To what extent did they want us to communicate with them? How did they want to be included? And both said essentially the same thing. They said, we'd like to be copied on the project team's meeting minutes, just so we can be kept informed of, how the project is proceeding and what the timing is. And then, of course, we'd both like to be present when the new wing is dedicated. And that was an easy ask. That was an easy thing to agree to. And so you see, these 2 individuals, though not part of the project team, were included as stakeholders because of their contributions. The next question we want to be asking is, why should we want to communicate more effectively? Anytime I contemplate that question, my first response is to save us all time, energy, and frustration. And I think that's a good starting point for why we should want to communicate more effectively. The next question is, what are the ground rules? In other words, What are the methods of communication we're going to use? What is the frequency of communication? So I'll use as an example a meeting we were facilitating recently. This is actually for a group of, believe it or not, 96 executives and senior managers. Long story short, this is for a global organization, a company in which owned itself. It owned 3 sub-companies, and they were the parent company. So they said, you know what? We're about to promote our chief financial officer to the position of president and CEO, and this person would like us to invite all the senior executives and senior managers from all 3 companies to come together in one place for one big meeting so we could all have some conversations about our strategies and how our strategies needed to be compatible with each other. And so in the project of planning this meeting, which as you can imagine, bringing 96 people together for 4 days in one place from all over the world was quite substantial. And so our project leader, the global head of operations, the COO for the parent company, said, you know what, we are going to meet as a project team once a week for about 16 weeks as we planned this. And in the process, he decided we were going to use Microsoft Excel to put this project together, and that was what we used. And so the agreements we reached about the ground rules for communication on our project included that each of us, of course, had our responsibilities. Each of us had to update our progress on our responsibilities in Microsoft Excel and send it to the COO's executive administrator by 12 noon on Friday. This way, she could put everything together on Friday afternoon and have it ready for our meeting, because our meetings were every Monday at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. So he was smart to establish some ground rules for our communication on our project, and we followed those. Then the next question we want to ask when we're looking to communicate for results is, what skill sets do we need? And that's why we're focusing on these 4 core communication skill sets today. And we also need to ask, what is our communication action plan? How are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to communicate the meeting minutes? How are we going to communicate on a project team? All of these are very important. So now let's start talking about the first of our 4 core communication skills, and the first is active listening. So to get us thinking about active listening, I share 2 quotes from Stephen Covey from his wonderful book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He first said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So focus first on listening to others and understanding what they are saying, then you will have time to convey what you want to convey and make sure that others understand you. He also said, listen to more than words, listen with the eyes and heart. In other words, pay attention to other people's nonverbal communication. I think both pieces of excellent advice. Okay, one more quote, and I will read this slowly at least twice to help people understand why this is included in our webinar. This is from Thomas Banville, and Banville once wrote, I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I am not at all sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. Let me read that slowly one more time, and then I'll offer a few comments. So I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I am not at all sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant, AKA both parties are 50% responsible in any communication. So if I'm speaking, I am just as responsible as you are for making sure you understand what I am saying, as I am responsible for understanding what you are saying. Both parties, we've all heard the expression, communication is a two-way street, and hence the quote from Banville. Okay, so now let's talk about listening and why listening is important. Listening is important first because it gives us a deeper awareness or appreciation of opposing views. Secondly, listening helps us to develop and or maintain a relationship. Very, very important for helping us to establish and then maintain effective interpersonal working relationships. Listening also provides us for new opportunities or possibilities. I'd like you to think of the following. When someone says something to us, I'd suggest that there are three possibilities. The first is that we readily agree with them. The second is that we readily disagree with them. And the third is that maybe we partially agree with them. So we have some responsibilities here, no matter which of the three possibilities this is. Then also, listening makes sure that we minimize the level and degree of misunderstandings that we can have. And also, listening prepares us for effective problem solving, and listening prepares us to take action. Pardon me, I just jumped a slide. There we go. So what are some of the reasons why people don't listen? Well, first of all, sometimes people are unable to identify with us. And in case you question that, fair enough, I ask you to think about the following. Is there someone you interact with in your workplace who you quickly tune out? Maybe you either mentally or physically walk away from them because you just don't want to interact with them, or if they're there, you might even nod your head like you're listening, but you're not really listening. Well, if that's true of at least one person with whom you interact, is it possible there's at least one person with whom you interact at work who tunes you out, right? Okay. Next, sometimes people don't value a relationship with you. Again, same point. If there's at least one person with whom you interact who, you either mentally or physically walk away from, or you want to keep your interaction with them as brief as possible, well, again, the same might be true for someone with you. Also, sometimes people don't listen because they don't want to hear. They might be distracted. That's fair. Other times people don't listen because they don't know how to listen. They're sometimes, and we are sometimes, in too much of a hurry to get on with the next thing, and we don't make the time necessary to fully listen to someone. And this plays into the next reason why people don't listen sometimes. Sometimes we're impatient. And other times we are, in fact, embroiled in something that is consuming our mental energy. And we're not really ready to listen. It's not the right time. I'm working on a project or I'm rushing to a meeting. Any number of reasons. So why should we listen? I think we covered that, so I accidentally went backwards again. Okay, so now let's focus on what active listening is really about. And I've underlined some of these words and phrases for very specific reasons. So, first of all, active listening is about demonstrating acceptance of another person no matter what they think, feel, say, or do. You see, what people want most is to be heard, understood, and appreciated. Some have said what people really want most is to be acknowledged. Now, nowhere in there are we saying that it is imperative that we agree with someone, even though that is what really all of us like. The reality is, though, we all recognize, like it or not, that others are not always going to agree with us. So what we really want most is to be acknowledged, to be heard, understood, and appreciated. And this is why some psychotherapists make a lot of money and why some bartenders make a lot of money. They listen. They listen. Secondly, listening is about leading to mutual understanding and mutual respect, also known as empathy. So to be clear here, though, when we listen actively, we are maybe taking written notes. And if we can't take written notes, we're taking mental notes to make sure we fully listen to someone. And that's imperative, especially in this, rushed world in which we live, to stop, look, and listen. Just as we were taught as little kids when we approached the railroad tracks, we should really stop, look, and listen. Fully listen to someone. And this takes work. It takes practice. It takes regular practice to make sure that we are fully listening to someone. And then thirdly, active listening is independent of whether or not you agree with the other person's perspective or point of view. Exactly. Active listening is about focusing on the other person, fully listening, let them fully expressing themselves and what they want to say, and then essentially acknowledging what you have heard them say, which is yours. Okay, so now let's talk about how to listen actively both before we are listening and while we are listening. So before we are listening, we want to ensure the appropriate time and place. P.S. I always make an effort, whenever possible, to meet with someone privately in a private place, whether it's my office, their office, a conference room, whenever possible. That is the best environment in which to listen. And of course, we also want to minimize environmental distractions. I'm very fond of telling people and expecting that we'll all turn our phones down to 0 or stun, which is another way of saying vibrate. But you never want a phone call to interrupt your effort to listen to someone. Unless it's someone calling you, telling you that they're about to go into labor or that someone's life is at stake, really phone calls should not be allowed as interruptions. And then while we're listening, we want to start by opening the conversation positively. So I have there in parentheses the 2-for-1 rule. I'd just like to explain that. When I was active a while back in a Toastmasters club, for those who don't know about Toastmasters, it's an international organization. There are Toastmasters clubs all over the world. Anyone can join. And what everyone does is everyone gets a turn to deliver a brief presentation, usually something on the order of 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes just a little bit longer. And everyone else who is not speaking is given a very simple form on which you write 2 things that the speaker did well and 1 thing that the speaker might do differently next time. And I so appreciate that forum, that environment, that I've taken this 2-for-1 exchange to apply to all forms of communication. So, for example, when I'm listening, I want to be sure that I focus on 2 things that the person to whom I'm listening does well, 2 sincere compliments that I can pay them, 2 sincere acknowledgments that I can make, maybe non-verbally, to let them know that I'm listening, and hold back in reserve maybe the one thing that I might want the other person to do differently next time, and just sort of hold back on that and focus first on what they do well. And of course, to focus on the other person who is speaking. That is what is imperative for us when we're listening. So while we're listening, let's expand on these. When we are looking to open the conversation positively, we want to acknowledge the other person or persons and set them at ease. Thank them for coming in. Let's get all of ourselves focused. Then I'll ask for specifics. Tell me what's going on, what's happening. You asked if we could sit down here and talk about something that happened. So just tell me in your own words what happened. And I want to be very clear about this and about context as well, because this plays into listening, to resolving conflicts, to constructive feedback, and to coaching, is whatever we discuss in my office, your office, in a conference room, as long as neither of us are discussing anyone doing anything illegal, then everything we discuss stays in this room. And that's an important promise and commitment that I believe in, and frankly, which I suggest by staying true to that has increased the level of confidence that people have in me, the level of trust that people have in me, and their willingness to approach me with a problem, because they know that I will fully listen and then commit to trying to work with them to solve the problem. So ask for specifics, and then, of course, ask for what specific help they want from you. How may I help you? What can I do to help you? And then to expand on focusing on the other person, we want to mirror them. So when someone is calm, we want to be calm. When someone is upset, this is the one and only time that I can think of that instead of mirroring directly, I want to mirror oppositely, which is to say this: to fully listen. Give someone a chance to fully express themselves, and for me to remain calm and focused on them and listening. Because when you allow someone else to fully express themselves, especially when emotions are charged, and for you to remain calm, that is extraordinarily important and valuable. It will allow them to fully express themselves and to also, frankly, physiologically exhaust themselves to the point where they will hopefully be more receptive to what you have to say in response to what they have said. And then, of course, there's paraphrasing, giving back to someone, your understanding of what they've just said. We, of course, want to show empathy and positive regard. This next point I found extraordinarily important, and that is to accept their perceptions and their feelings as real for them without negating them. We've all heard the expression that perception is reality, and you see someone's perceptions of a situation, of a problem, are real for them. So that is so important to remember and to acknowledge that in that person. They will so greatly appreciate you for acknowledging their perceptions, their feelings as real for them, and never, ever, ever try to negate them or differ with them. Let them express. Next, pay attention to their nonverbals and attend to yours. And finally, make sure that we don't generalize. Focus on specifics. Focus on specific actions, specific behavior. Okay. So while listening, let's expand on 2 more points. We want to explore their need. So we want to ask open-ended questions about the situation. Tell me what's going on, what's happening. Next, confirm similarities, in other words, areas of agreement, then explore differences. So this is staying consistent with the 2-for-1 rule. We want to do everything we possibly can to focus on at least 2 areas of agreement first, because once we do that, they will be much more receptive to our even suggesting that we might have at least one area of disagreement, and will often be more ready to explore understandings of disagreements after we've covered first areas where we agree. Next, avoid jumping to solution finding or giving unsolicited advice. That is just human nature. And again, that takes practice. We often are in a hurry and we want to get to the next situation, next problem. We just want to say, yeah, I agree with you, yeah, and move on. And while some might consider that an efficient way of handling things, it's often not the best way to handle things because people feel disrespected when we rush them. Then again, ask what specific help or advice or actions they want from us. And finally, probe for interests behind positions and issues behind issues. All I mean by that is we learn this over time is sometimes someone is complaining about something and that's not their real complaint. There's something more deep-seated than that. And it's important for us to explore that a little more fully. You know, you didn't ask to meet in my office so you could complain about the food in the cafeteria. You know, there must be something more pressing that's really bothering you. So now that we have the door closed and it's just us and it's going to stay right here, again, as long as we're not talking about anyone doing anything illegal, tell me what's going on. Tell me what's really bothering you. So that's what I mean by probe for interests behind positions and issues behind issues. And finally, summarize your understanding of them. Reflect back your understanding of the whole situation and what the other person wants and needs. So what I've heard you say is, we work hard and we work smart, but we could do a better job of working together as a team. Did I hear you correctly? Did I understand you correctly? And finally, don't move to next steps until there is mutual consent. We both need to confirm where we agree, and now we can then, and only then, start talking about action steps for both of us. Okay, so again, why should we listen? Well, listening is challenging. It takes time, energy, patience, and sincere and genuine interest. Meanwhile, though, the payoff of listening is that investing in another person can yield saved time and energy in the long run. Listening can yield a better understanding for both of us of problems and situations. Listening can lead to improved trust and mutual respect. When we fully listen to someone and we make a habit of it, that is good news that will actually travel, and people appreciate that. And finally, when we listen fully and actively, we give them, and often us, heightened motivation to take action. So now let's start talking about constructive feedback. And we get the thinking about constructive feedback started with a quote from Ken Blanchard, author of The 1 Minute Manager, and I'm forgetting some of his other popular books. I encourage you to take a closer look at some of the works of Dr. Ken Blanchard. My favorite quote of his when it comes to constructive feedback is that feedback is the breakfast of champions. Now, I'm from a generation where we grew up with TV commercials for a cereal called Wheaties, and Wheaties advertised itself as the breakfast of champions. So why does Blanchard think that feedback is the breakfast of champions? Well, because feedback, and this is coming directly from Dr. Blanchard, so feedback when delivered constructively is going to be best received. So what are some of the reasons why we can and do and should give feedback? Well, you may recall just a moment ago when we were talking about active listening, I first suggested that what people want most is to be heard, understood, and appreciated. Well, here it is again, and in the context of feedback. So some of the reasons why we can, should, and perhaps even want to give feedback is we want to provide input that the other person who's receiving it hears, understands, and appreciates. Because, of course, we want them to take action on our feedback. And to do so, first they have to hear what we're saying, understand what we're saying, and appreciate what we're saying. So just as we listen to let others know that we hear them, understand them, and appreciate them, you see we are role modeling what we are hoping for, what we are expecting from others, is to hear us, understand us, and appreciate us and what we are saying. We also give feedback to provide input to others in ways which will keep them on a productive behavior track. We give feedback to clarify misperceptions, to curb undesirable, ineffective, or disruptive behavior, and we also give feedback to improve problem solving and decision making. So what are the two core goals of giving feedback? Well, first of all, we want to generate positive and useful behavior change in others. We want people to take action based on our feedback. And we also give feedback to initiate a relationship, to often maintain, and then to foster our productive interpersonal working relationships, sometimes with our direct reports, sometimes with our colleagues, and even sometimes with our manager and others who may be above us in the organizational hierarchy. That's right. Okay. Here are some of the reasons why we don't give constructive feedback. Sometimes we're concerned, we're afraid. We're concerned about making the situation or relationship worse. We might be worried about pushing someone over the edge. Other times we might not give constructive feedback because we're worried that we might generate someone else retaliating or giving us a counterpunch or resenting us. The next one, oh my gosh, is this possible? That sometimes we're worried that we might be wrong about our position or behavior? Oh my gosh. So a quick check-in here, and someone can let us know during the Q&A portion of the webinar, is there anyone on this webinar who is perfect, who has never made a mistake? And please, if you are, please let us know during the Q&A period, and perhaps we'll have you lead this webinar the next time. Other reasons we don't give constructive feedback, let's be honest, sometimes we're worried about wasting our time or energy. We might be worried about breaking a cultural norm, and God forbid, and hopefully this never happens or has happened to you, can you say lawsuit? We might be worried about someone, suing us because of some feedback we provided. Hopefully never. Okay. Here are some reasons why we should give constructive feedback. You see, by giving feedback that is constructive, we avoid a lot of problems. And some of the problems we avoid by giving constructive feedback include avoiding the problem of a deteriorating or worsening of a situation or a working relationship. We also, by giving constructive feedback, we avoid the problem of people harboring resentment. We also avoid the problem of people spreading a problem to others. And my favorite problem to avoid is gossip or talking behind one's back, because you see, this gets to the heart of what I believe is a core principle about communicating effectively. And I believe I mentioned this on a slide, but let me start to mention it now. When we have a problem or an issue with someone, we want to find a private place to have that conversation. It can be their office, our office, conference room, somewhere private, where we can actually close the door and keep our voices low, don't raise our voices so others can hear us, but go into a private place. Because when we have an issue with someone, we need to discuss it with them privately and keep it between just the two of us. And this avoids gossip or people talking behind our back. Okay, so now let's talk about before we give feedback, then we'll talk about when we give feedback and after we give it. So first, before we give any feedback, we want to be timely. So the 3 best times in order of providing feedback is, number 1, as and when the performance behavior is occurring. The second best time to give feedback is immediately after the performance behavior has occurred. And then third is certainly ASAP, as soon as possible after the performance behavior has occurred. It needs to be the same day, preferably. I'll even go as far out as within an hour of the performance behavior occurring. Honestly, the sooner the better. It's painful sometimes, but believe me, the sooner you provide feedback after the performance behavior has occurred, the better off you're both going to be. And also, of course, as I mentioned before, arrange the right time and place to meet and talk. Private, 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 always. So now while we're giving feedback, I'd like to suggest some steps to follow. So first of all, we want to state our case, describe what we have seen and or what we have heard. Then exchange information and understanding perceptions. So make sure both parties have a chance to provide their point of view, let the other person go first, and we do our best to listen fully and to understand what they are saying, who they are, where they're coming from. Then it's our turn to express and make sure the other person understands and appreciates us, has heard what we've said, and understands and appreciates our perspective. Next, we always want to be focused on seeking solutions and agreements. In other words, focus on specific performance behavior and on as many agreements as possible. You see, the more agreements we can reach with another person, the much easier it is to work through disagreements. Then next, ask them. Tell me what you think. Tell me how you would like to solve this problem. You see, when you ask or invite someone to help you understand and analyze a problem, they are far more likely to remain with you to participate in the solution. Let me just say that one more time. When you ask or invite someone to help you understand and analyze a problem, you see, now you've engaged them, and they appreciate that, and they'll be much more inclined to work with you, to collaborate with you towards discovering a solution that will work. Then, of course, seek solutions and agreements. More agreements we can reach, the better. And what we're starting to do there then is to agree on action plans. These are the steps you will take, and this is the specific timing that correlates with the actions you will take, and then these are the actions I will take, and the timing for my actions. And finally, of course, we want to close the conversation positively. Then, after giving feedback, you see, when it's over, it's over. It's time to move on. We've provided feedback, and now it's up to them to take appropriate action. So bring the issue, whatever it was, up again only if you see the performance behavior recurring. Keep that in mind. So now let's talk about resolving conflicts. This is about dealing with resistance, and there are some deeper thoughts behind these that I'll be sharing with you throughout the whole discussion about resolving conflicts. So I share with everyone a quote from a gentleman named John Cage, who once said, "I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones." Well, let me tell you a little bit about John Cage that might help you appreciate this quote. So there we are, and so people are saying, you know, I'm here to communicate. I'm here to understand where you're going, where you're coming from, and so John Cage said this because John was a long-standing, what is called an avant-garde performance artist. He was a musician, but he liked experimenting. He liked trying new things. And so one day, hello everyone, this is your presenter, Chris Devaney. I apologize. I understand that we lost our connection there for a bit, and it was around slide 22. We're up to slide 28. However, you'll be able to review the full presentation after we finish. And for those of you purchasing the recorded version, well, you're good anyway. So I was on slide 28. We'll resume the webinar now. And again, thank you for your indulgence. So we were just talking about resolving conflicts, and I was talking a little bit about John Cage. So John Cage is a performance artist. He writes this piece called 4 Minutes of Silence. And it's on the program one day at Carnegie Hall, a prestigious concert hall in New York City. And so people have paid good money to be at this performance. There are other pieces, you know, that are being performed, and then it's his time in the program, and they see in the program John Cage, 4 Minutes of Silence. Long story short, he walks out, they have this grand piano, and he walks out with, you know, in full tucks and tails, and he sits thoughtfully in front of the piano for 4 minutes. Well, as time is wearing on, people are starting to boo, people are starting to hiss, people are starting to groan, and they're slowly realizing that this is the 4 minutes of silence. You see, John Cage wrote this piece, 4 Minutes of Silence, to make a point that people should think, that people should stop and reflect and pause and think about, you know, everything. And I think he made an excellent point. It's just that it wasn't fully appreciated. So that just gives you a little bit of context of why this quote is in here. I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm afraid of the old ones. So to understand resolving conflicts, it's important to first understand what resistance is. You see, resistance is actually a natural part of change. If everyone where you worked thought exactly alike and acted exactly alike, believe it or not, your business, your organization would eventually die. Why? Because there would be no creativity, no innovation, no opportunities for growth. Your workplace would become static. It would be stuck in one place and it would go nowhere. And So you see, resistance is where people offer differing ideas, suggestions of how we can do things better, faster, more profitably, whatever it might be. And so, though we are often uncomfortable when people resist us, it's actually a great opportunity sometimes for us to defend our position, to advocate for our position. And when someone offers a different perspective, it's also a great opportunity for us to listen to what they have to say because, let's think about it. When someone offers a different idea, there are three possibilities. One is that we might actually agree with them. One is that we might disagree with them. Or one is that we might partially agree with them. And so since all of those, possibilities offer some opportunities, I'm sorry, I should mention a fourth possibility. One of the possibilities is that we completely disagree with them and that their idea is going to go nowhere. So, but two of the three possibilities are giving us chances to maybe do something better or faster. And so think about that. Resistance is also protection and energy. So when someone resists us, it feels like they're pushing against us, doesn't it? Well, the reality is this. I'll just use the group of us on this webinar today as an example. So those of us participating in this webinar, we all have some shared life experiences, and maybe some of us have some shared work experiences, yet each of us has our own unique set of life experiences and work experiences. And as a result, for each and every one of us, of our own unique set of life experiences and work experiences, each of us has developed our own system of values and beliefs. Who we value, what we value about who we value, what we believe about how the world works, maybe what we believe about how things work where we work. And so when someone resists us, you see, they are actually perceiving that we are threatening. We don't mean to most of the time, but that we are threatening some aspect of their values and belief system. So they are resisting us to protect themselves from this perceived threat. So what is actually most important for us when someone else resists us is to ask them some questions so we can better understand what is behind their resistance. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts and feelings on this? What is something bothering you? And if so, what is bothering you about our discussion where we disagree? Help me understand better where you're coming from. And it's questions like that which help us to better understand where someone else is coming from who's resisting us. So when we approach resistance, it's important for us to keep some things in mind. We need to take it seriously and respect resistance, power, and energy. Remember, resistance for someone else is protection. Think of someone putting their hands up in front of them as kind of like a shield against this perceived threat. That's what is happening to them when they resist us. So we need to think about that. Also, in approaching resistance, we need to make sure that we keep the lines of communication open. Sometimes human nature is such that, we just want to walk away or not engage with someone who's resisting us, yet that's actually one of the worst things we can do. Very important. Keep the lines of communication open. Also, don't rush the process. Just as with active listening and with constructive feedback, if we proceed, as we sometimes will, to rush the process, we're eventually going to do more harm than good, because people will perceive that we are not listening to them, we are not respecting them, we are not hearing, understanding, and or appreciating them and what they are saying. Also, in approaching resistance, it's important to be aware of the resistance and the reactions within ourselves. Sometimes when someone resists us, we're thinking, sometimes we might even be saying, but more importantly, we are thinking, wait a minute, I'm your manager. Why are you going against me? And hopefully we're not saying it that way, but no, maybe sometimes we do. So when someone resists us, be aware that sometimes our inclination is to resist them back, is basically say, look, I'm the manager, you do what I say. And that's generally with other adults. It might work as a parent, depending on the age of the child, but that usually doesn't work too well between two adults. Also, and this is one of the more challenging aspects of approaching resistance, ask what you can learn from the resistance. Remember, 2 of the 3 possibilities when someone resists us is that they might be presenting us either with new information, which we need to at least consider, or they might be presenting an idea that we heard a long time ago, maybe even kind of forgot about, and they're reminding us of something we heard and appreciated quite some time ago. So just be open to understanding what you can learn from someone else's resistance. And also, very importantly, look for mutual gain. Look for as many areas of agreement as possible in approaching resistance, and where we can agree, Dealing with resistance should never be an I win and you lose proposition. It should be more like, where can we both win? Where can we both gain from this difference of opinions or perspectives? All right. So some typical responses to resistance include, we might overuse our power. I'm the manager, do as I say. Manipulate the person or situation. We all know each other's hot buttons and touch points, and don't go down that road. Sometimes we might try to use force of reason. I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. And of course, that might have been what we did as kids, but that doesn't work too well as adults. Other times we might ignore resistance. Very dangerous. Big mistake. Don't do it. Other times we might play off relationships. In other words, we might be tempted when someone who's resisting us goes on a break. There might be a coworker of theirs who they get along with very well, someone who likes them, who works with them, and we might be inclined to go to that person and say, I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting through to Joe. What advice do you have? And that might even sound well-intended, but that's a huge, huge mistake. It violates that cardinal rule I shared earlier of, when we have a disagreement with someone, find a private environment, their office, our office, conference room, sit down and talk it through. Don't go to a third party. Big mistake. Other times we might be inclined to make deals. Those are usually, though, short-term gains at the expense of long-term effective working relationships. Sometimes we might be inclined to push aside the resistor. Again, big mistake. Disrespect is often going to lead to a kind of a spiraling down in the relationship. And other times, we might be inclined to give in too soon. That's also a big mistake, and I'll share a couple of examples of when others might give in too soon to us and why we should be concerned. And that leads us to all the different types of resistance. I'm going to focus on just a few here. The first 2 I'm going to focus on with you are in the left column. Those are the fourth one down, malicious compliance, and the sixth one down, easy agreement or compliance. So here is what I'd like to share about my experience with compliance, which hopefully is compatible with your experience with compliance. So sometimes someone resists us, and we walk over to them and say, you know, I think I gave a list of specific instructions about how to carry out this procedure, and you don't seem to be following those. And sometimes they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, you know, I'll get back to it. And they mean well, and they'll actually go back and do it the right way. They were making an honest mistake. Other times, though, hopefully infrequently, but this is just something to be aware of, sometimes a person will be dissing you without you fully realizing it. What I mean is, sometimes people will say, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. And the problem is, though, they weren't really agreeing with you. They were claiming to give in very quickly and agreeing with you just to get you off their back. And the problem with that is, the second you turn your back and head back toward your office, they'll go right back to doing it the way they were doing it before. So sometimes that and this is what we call compliance. So sometimes people are being compliant because they're actually malicious. Hopefully that's very, very rare, but just be aware it can sometimes be the case. They actually are trying to disobey you because they don't like you, they don't agree with you, they don't agree with your approach, and they're just going to pretend like they're going along with you when they really aren't. Other times there's what we call easy agreement or compliance, and it's just a case of someone actually giving in very quickly, but they're also doing it to get you off their back, and maybe they'll do it the way you want, or possibly they'll go back to doing it the way they were doing it as soon as you turn your back. So I'm just saying there are several possibilities. When someone agrees with you quickly, just, you know, hope for the best, but also be aware of some of the other possibilities when someone agrees with you quickly. One other one I'd like to focus on is also in the left column. It's the eighth one down. That's silence. For me as a manager, perhaps for you as a manager as well, this is the most difficult type of resistance that I have ever had to deal with. Why? Because when someone is silent, it is extremely difficult to perceive that they're actually disagreeing with us. So, again, just be aware when someone is silent, try to maybe engage them and say, you know, John or Sue, you know, like, what do you see in this that works for you? You know, try to get them to articulate, to actually say how and where they agree with you, and be sure that they do as best as you can. So that's what I do when someone is silent. I like to get some kind of verbal acknowledgement and something more than just a grunt or a nodding of the head. Okay. So in dealing with resistance, we want to look for behavioral clues. In other words, pay attention to other people's nonverbals. The next bullet point is worded that way because we were just doing some work with Inc. magazine. Trust your instincts and visceral responses. We're all 50% head and 50% gut. 50% cerebral intelligence, 50% emotional intelligence. Use both. Use both your what's in your head and what's in your gut. Don't ignore either, because then you potentially reduce your effectiveness by 50%. Next, maintain your focus on objectives. What is our goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? Next, stay calm and treat resistors with respect. I actually learned this from some people at our very first ISP, Internet Service Provider, called TIAC. Every one of their representatives, whenever we would call with a problem about email, internet, website, whatever it might be, we would usually be highly emotionally charged. They would be, "I thank you for calling GIAC. This is Paul. How may I help you?" They would just maintain calm. And you see, it's very difficult for any of us to remain emotionally charged when someone else is being very calm. Also, in some cases, embrace or give voice to the resistance. What I mean there is repeat back to them as best as you can their words, because it may be the first time they're hearing their own words, and it gives them a chance to reconsider their position as well as what they've just said. Other times, there are some situations where you want to let others respond. So sometimes when someone is resisting us in front of others, there will be opportunities for their peers. Sometimes their peers will speak up and say, "Paul, sorry, you're dead wrong on that." Or, "Sue, you really need to rethink that, because, when I did that, when I tried that procedure, it worked very, very well when we followed the instructions we were given." And then also seek themes, metaphors, and new possibilities in the resistance. So to summarize, recognize that resistance always exists. It's not bad or good. It's a natural part of change, and it's protection and energy. Then catch resistance early. Remember, the three best times to catch resistance are as and when the resistance is being offered, immediately after it's been offered, or as soon as possible after the resistance has been offered, and deal with it. We might be inclined to try to walk away from it, pretend it doesn't exist, but my colleague Harvey Simkovitz once taught me, doing that is like leaving a paper cut untreated. If you leave a paper cut untreated, it's going to become infected. If you continue to leave it untreated, that infection is going to go viral. It's going to turn into a virus. So when you allow someone's resistance to go unchecked or unresponded to, it sends a message to everyone else that that is okay. And it enables everyone to resist you. And you don't want that. That's not good. Also, be patient and persistent with resistance. Be persistent about dealing with it, and also, though, be patient with allowing someone to respond to how you have responded to their resistance. Remember, pay attention to your instincts and visceral responses, and always look for the win-win. Dealing with resistance, resolving a conflict should never be an I win, you lose proposition. Okay? Now let's talk a bit about coaching to gain constructive change and continuous improvement. So what are the goals of coaching? Well, there are three. The first goal of coaching is to help people resolve their problems and challenges and achieve their full professional potential in a collegial manner. How may I help you? How can we solve this? To work collaboratively with someone. Help them. Second goal of coaching is to build a relationship with people which generates trust and mutuality. And the third goal of coaching is to increase your value and provide additional leverage in the organization for constructive change. So think of it this way. I've been engaged in coaching now for 23 years. And one of the most important lessons I've learned about coaching is I've developed a brief definition for coaching. So let me share it with you, and I'll explain it. My definition of an effective coach is someone who is an approachable source of confidential support. An approachable source of confidential support. People should feel, they should believe that they can approach you with any problem. Why? Because you'll bring them in. You'll close the door. Again, as long as no one talks about anyone doing anything illegal, everything that's discussed stays in that room. And then, so you keep the confidences. and then you do everything you can to provide support. The best definition of a manager that I ever got came from my manager at Sprint, Brian Bogosian. He had messed up. He brought me in to manage our call center and then left me alone for 3 months. He leaves a voicemail one night saying that we had a problem and he needed to see me first thing Friday morning. Well, I got the message Thursday night. I didn't sleep at all. Come into his office first thing, and then I really panicked because he said, close the door and have a seat. And I had no idea. I had this terrible feeling. I had done something wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I had this terrible feeling I was about to be fired. Just the opposite. In fact, he actually called me in to apologize, which it's a good thing I was sitting down for. He said, I screwed up. He said, you've been here 3 months. I haven't checked in with you at all. He says, well, that ends now. Every week, once a week, I'm going to call you. I'm also going to stop by your office just to check in and see how things are going. You, of course, can come to me anytime. Because my number one job as your manager, these are the words I've never forgotten. This is 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And he said, my number one job as your manager is to enable you to be successful, to provide you with whatever you need in order to succeed. Well, that became my manager's mantra. That is my definition of a manager. We all as managers are there to help our direct reports be successful, to provide that support. So when we're coaching, we should be an approachable source of confidential support. Okay, so here is how to coach constructively before, during, and after. And let me touch on these. So first, before we coach, and you're going to see a number of these are familiar. Find an appropriate time and place. Your office, their office, conference room, wherever. I prefer my office. Sometimes people prefer to meet their office or in the conference room. That's fine. So then get yourself relaxed, grounded, and prepared to focus on the other person. This is about them. This is not about you. Then while we're coaching, first we want to acknowledge them and actively listen for understanding. Then seek, explore, and exchange perceptions and points of view. Listen first. Seek to understand first, then to be understood, said Stephen Covey, right? Then offer constructive feedback. Remember, when offering constructive feedback, first identify as many things that this person has done and is doing well. Because the more sincere compliments you can pay an individual, the more readily they will listen to you when it's time to address any areas for improvement, suggested performance behavior changes. And then, of course, focus on next steps. What are our action steps going forward? What steps are you going to take and by what dates? And what steps will I take? And what's the timing? So you both are emerging from this interaction with action plans. And then finally, summarize and close the conversation positively. Thank them for coming in and wish them well. And then I just need to amend the first bullet point after coaching. Consider summarizing the conversation in a friendly, professional, confidential email, not a memo. Maintain confidences with respect to sensitive information. Follow up at an appropriate time later to gauge the other person's thoughts and feelings on the issue, and offer continued direction and support as the other person requires. So to summarize, coaching is essential for anyone to grow, to develop, and to be successful, and it yields our personal beliefs to the individual, to them. Remember, it's about them. as well as to our organization, our business, because they are also our client. We work for them. And then coaching just requires a few things. It requires an investment in time and energy, a positive attitude towards or belief in people, a knowledge of how the world works, effective interpersonal skills, and continual self-development and practice as a coach. I'm going to skip over a few slides because we want to get to your questions. I encourage you to look at these after we finish today's presentation. I'll just touch on one. A young FBI man was put in charge of their supply department, and in an effort to cut costs, he reduced the size of memo paper. One of the new memo sheets landed on the desk of J. Edgar Hoover, who disliked the narrow margin and wrote back, "Watch the borders." For the next 6 weeks, it was extremely difficult to enter the United States by road from either Mexico or Canada. So just to summarize, we focused on 4 core communication skills today: active listening, constructive feedback, resolving conflicts, which is about dealing with resistance, and effective coaching. So now let's turn it back to Vicki for your questions. Vicki.